Bonjour, good morning. I have a lot of paper with me. Forgive me for a moment, trying to figure out where I'm going to put it all. I'd like to thank you all for being here this morning. Merci à tout le monde. Je pense que c'est une bonne idée de faire un peu de explication au sujet des amendements de Parti vert pour le projet de loi C-38. The amendments that I have presented to the House, to the journals, they were in on time on Friday. I submitted 330. We were initially informed that we had about 320 survive. As of the moment, I can't give you an exact count because we've lost a couple more. We're certainly above 300, but there have been some of my other amendments that have been removed. The first thing I wanted to say in response to Peter Van Loon's claims that this public relations document of a budget, jobs, growth, and long-term prosperity, that somehow parliamentarians doing their work in Parliament to ensure that legislation receives review and to amend it where possible is somehow a threat to our nation's economy would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. So I want to start by saying that amending the omnibus budget implementation bill is the obligation and duty of parliamentarians who have become aware through reading it, which I highly recommend, that the 420 pages amending 70 laws are not connected to the budget. I mean, I think that's the most important way to put it. This is a budget document, and the budget and main estimates have gone through. This, the 420-page budget there's no shelf here, excuse me. This, the 420-page Bill C-38, represents an attack by stealth on 70 different laws. There are very weak connections for some of these to the budget document, and for others there is no connection at all. So just to recap, we are expecting at noon a decision from the Speaker of the House on the first order question of the day, which is whether he will agree with my legal argument that I put forward a week ago today, June 4th, on a point of order that Bill C-38 is not properly submitted to the House at all under Standing Rule 68 and should be rejected. If Speaker Scheer agrees with my legal argument, as the official opposition and the Liberal Party have done, then we don't have to worry about these amendments at all, and the Conservatives can regroup, look at Bill C-38, and decide what's properly in a budget bill and what isn't. If that doesn't occur, the next thing the Speaker will do is to rule on how we are going to approach the voting on the 800 or so amendments that exist at the moment on the order paper to Bill C-38. These are my amendments. There's double-sided. This is 300 and some amendments to Bill C-38. And I thought I'd try to give you a summary of what's in here and then take questions. Everyone keeps asking, what's your most important amendment, or what are you trying to achieve? Well, when the government of the day submits a bill that's 420 pages long that repeals, amends, or otherwise revises 70 different laws, I mean, this legislation is 700 clauses. I mean, you're not going to be able to do a decent job of amendments without having hundreds of amendments. It's not a tactic. It is the natural consequence of the size and scale and scope of the bill that the government that Jim Flaherty put forward, allegedly a budget implementation bill, but which is in fact nothing of the kind. So a natural consequence of the length of the government's bill is the length of the opposition's amendments. It's not some sort of perversion of democracy. On the contrary, the effort to put forward meaningful amendments to repeal, revise, improve C-38 to make it actually work takes a lot of amendments. So a quick review of the things that my amendments touch on many sections of Bill C-38. The most substantive and lengthy amendments that I've put forward do deal with the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. Bear in mind that under C-38, the current Canadian Environmental Assessment Act passed in 1993 was repealed. There's an entirely new scheme of legislation that's been put forward under C-38 with the scantest of review by the Subcommittee of Finance. I did attend as many Subcommittee of Finance hearings as I could. They had a grand total of less than 14 hours of hearings on all the changes to basically putting forward an entirely new piece of legislation, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. In the normal course of things, that alone would have had days of review, hearings, and witnesses. It was compressed as with all the other parts of Part 3 of C-38 in short form, a few nights of hearings, a total of less than 14 hours. So inadequate review, what we've done with the SIA amendments is all we hear from the talking points from Mr. Oliver and Stephen Harper, that they want one project, one review. They want timelines to shorten hearings. Fine, I've kept those in, right? But what I've done is I've reconstructed the scheme of environmental assessment law that they took a sledgehammer to in the way they revised SIA. You don't need to destroy the definition for screenings. They have access to a comprehensive study. You don't need to destroy the definition of environment. Just to give you a quick example. Over and over again, we have Conservative members of Parliament from, well, Michael Chong and Dave Tilson are always rising in the House for Wellington Halton Hills and Dufferin Caledon, asking for a federal environmental review of the Melancton Township mega-quarry proposal. If that mega-quarry proposal were to go to a federal review the way C-38 is drafted, the environmental study would be restricted to looking at the impact on fish and migratory birds, not on the adjacent farming communities, not on the question of the water table, not about what happens when you dig a big hole in the ground, unless it affects fish and migratory birds. You need to understand how much damage has been done to environmental assessment to understand why I needed so many amendments. The second piece, of course, has been to restore the Fisheries Act, protection of habitat, while still allowing the notion that there would be areas where they would hand off to provinces, areas where there were reduced requirements for permits. But we must, as 4 former federal fisheries ministers have said, we must protect the Fisheries Act from this kind of wholesale reckless change without adequate review. We've also changed the Species at Risk Act, the Canadian Environment Protection Act. I tried, by the way, one of my amendments that was ruled out of order was to try to reinsert some of the roles of the Auditor General to review agencies that are being removed under C-38. Some of my amendments weren't ruled in order, and it's unfortunate because they were good ones. I tried to insert that in the Coasting Trade Act, where there was seismic testing in the offshore areas, that they'd have to have a marine biologist on board to ensure that there were not marine mammals in the area. They say in their talking points they do that. We tried to put it in the act. It was one of my amendments that didn't make it. We are okay that the amendment I put in to protect the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy is accepted as a votable amendment. We are okay that efforts in my amendments to protect the First Nations Fiscal and Statistical Management Act, that one was approved, protecting the amendment that deleted the removal of the Kyoto Protocol Implementation Act. But there are extensive amendments that I've put forward, for instance, as well on the Income Tax Act, providing a clearer definition of political activity for charities, meeting the purpose of what we hear Stephen Harper and his ministers say they want, without making it as draconian as what they've put in their changes. We've got a lot of amendments that deal with the National Energy Board Act to continue to protect the role of individual members of the board. They've got quite a lot of amendments that concentrate power in the role of the chair. We have left the timelines in place, but made sure that a proponent, and this is true for amendments under the Canadian Environment Assessment Act and the National Energy Board Act, the way the law is currently drafted in C-38, you could have a timeline that you can only have 24 months for review, but if the proponent, say a large oil company, stalls and doesn't produce an environmental review till 18 months into your 24-month period, there's no way to add time to the clock in fairness to all participants. So we've put the timelines apply to the proponent as well as to interveners, government agencies, and so on. So we've protected the idea of a timeline, but we've made it apply fairly to all parties. That's really, it's very hard to give a quick summary of my amendments, but I wanted to make it very, very clear that we have attempted very much to listen to what Joe Oliver and Keith Ashfield, the Minister of Natural Resources, the Minister for Fisheries, Minister of Environment, Peter Kent, and what the Prime Minister has said he wants. What Stephen Harper has said publicly is streamlining. They've never said publicly, it's our intent to destroy the federal role in environmental protection in Canada. The effect of their amendments is to destroy the federal role in environmental protection in Canada. And since that's not what they said they wanted to do, our amendments do what they said they wanted. Timelines, opportunities to pass a federal review to a province, but we've put in the criteria, objective ways that one can measure if it's a good idea or not, and we've allowed these timelines to be fair by applying timelines to proponents as well. But for the rest of the scheme of the Act, we've tried to restore what was in place before they took a sledgehammer to the Fisheries Act, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, the Species at Risk Act, the Navigable Waters Protection Act. I think that's all I'll say by way of opening. C'est pas possible de faire un petit résumé en français, mais seulement que mes amendements sont mes amendements ont le but de protéger les lois au niveau fédéral pour la protection de l'environnement, puis pour l'habitat, des pêches, pour les évaluations environnementales, d'avoir une approche égale, qui est aussi avec une approche où les dates limites appliquent sur les grandes industries et aussi pour les groupes écolos et pour le gouvernement lui-même. Alors maintenant, je suis prête pour les questions.